Hi, everybody. I'm Toni Reavis. Welcome to the main stage of the virtual Boston Marathon Expo. We want to wish everyone the best of luck on their virtual Boston Marathon for 2020. I could not be prouder to introduce the four-time Boston Marathon champion, king of the roads himself, Bill Rodgers, to our main stage. And Will,
Tony,
lovely to see you as always. How do you feel?
I feel tired. I just finished a near 2-hour run. I'm doing a half marathon in September. So a half marathon feels like training, feels like a marathon, particularly now with the virus, the psychological damage it did to everybody and physical damage it did to a lot of people has been very tough, I think, for everyone. So I think if you were a runner or a walker or a cyclist, someone like that you had an anchor, a stabilizing sort of force in your life, which I've been lucky enough to have since I was age 15. But it's a tricky time. I'm glad that we have a chance to talk, Tony, about for the new runners, and maybe even for some of the experienced Boston marathoners. Maybe we can talk about some ideas
Sure.
about the Expo coming up in virtual Boston.
Isn't it ironic that here's a sport that gives us so many health benefits physically and psychologically, and yet doing it together now is potentially damaging to us? That's so ironic.
Well, I think it's because the numbers are so big today. When I ran my first Boston in '73, I don't know how many runners there were. When I won the Philadelphia Marathon in '74, there were 400 runners. You might be able to do 400 runners today, but you can't do 30,000. So everyone had to adapt. The BAA and Hancock, I think with the state of Massachusetts, have to be smart about this. We got to beat COVID, got to wear the mask, got to social distance. We got to be smart. 170,000 Americans are dead right now because of some errors, I think, and Mother Nature too. But I also think I think one of the things that came out of this, my way of thinking a little bit, is we don't have too much in the way of public health in America. And I hope we can get a better look at our healthcare system in America. And I hope that sports like running and cycling and swimming and rowing and walking can get a little more support from the media in America and from the health insurance industry and the healthcare industry. So these sports get more visibility and more people can take care of themselves so they don't end up with a disease like COVID and pass away.
Bill, over all the years that you and I did runs around Jamaica Pond together from the store in Cleveland Circle,
Yes.
We talked a lot about the role that running could play in the overall health of the nation, and it never really took root. Of course, the Presidential Council on Physical Fitness, when we were boys in school, you do the 600-yard run, you do how many sit-ups you can do in a minute's time, but there was a sense of physical activity being an integral part of the educational experience. And of course, through the shrinking tax base, we've lost a lot of that as well. And it's almost like penny wise, pound foolish, because getting kids out there, it's left side, right side brain, they have to be taught individually as well as together.
Yeah, I really think that in the future, once we get COVID under control, when we get to normal situation, sports that play such a huge role in the American people's and all of our lives for better health. We know that active people live better, they live longer. And why do we have such a backwards healthcare system where prevention means nothing and money means everything? And to me, this is a huge issue. And I was talking with Joan Benoit Samuelson and Frank Schroeder on a Zoom the other day about the Falmouth Road race, big race here in Massachusetts, one of my favorite races in the country. And I just think, why? There's no reason for it. We have to take a look at this politically. I really think it's a huge issue. And you know me, Tony, I've always been a little bit of a ranter and raver. I know what I believe in. I've always been that way. I took a few hits for it over the years because I did speak up, but in a nutshell, I think our sport is all good. It's got only good things to it. And that's what I love. I mean, I did get started running in '63 when President Kennedy was talking about, as you said, the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports. Whatever happened to that? How come our Olympians aren't being utilized by the U.S. Olympic Committee? the Joan Benoit Samuelsons, the Frank Shorters, all of our Olympians in track and field and swimming and cycling, to reach out to our country school kids with corporate support. I don't know why. I think
Now,
we're missing out on a lot.
we definitely are. Well, let's get into Boston. It's such a it's so meaningful in both of our lives. The first marathon I saw was the 1975 Boston Marathon. I had moved to Boston from St. Louis in the year before, and my good friend John Terrio, who's a member of the Greater Boston Track Club, I was, certainly good friends with John because he went to school back in St. Louis with me, and so that's where I sort of met you socially, because Kent Smith, Dr. Kent Smith, was on the team, and so John and Kent were living together anyway. But the point was, I watched you in 1975, and when you come from St. Louis, Missouri, and the first time you see the Boston Marathon, you go, oh my goodness, look at this darn thing. There's nothing back home like this. I mean, it just shocks you. I mean, how huge, how big, how important, how focused the entire community was on that marathon. And for you to win it in an American record time and sort of break through like that, just exploded what Frank had already established by winning the gold medal in Munich in 1972. But I think when you became his rival, a couple of guys from East Coast elite schools, him Yale, you Wesleyan, him the brunette, you the tousle-haired blonde kid, but you both had those silky strides, and you went back and forth, exchanging victories and being real rivals. I think that sort of built the sport and really catapulted into what we refer to as the running boom.
Well, I think that, the early days when Frank took that gold medal, it was the ripples spread out all across the country and then all across the world as other countries developed their marathons, such as London Marathon, Berlin Marathon. Tokyo evolved later, but Fukuoka had already been developed, in Japan since 1947, I think, World War II, and is there Boston, but I think, I felt the same way, Tony. I'm from Hartford, Connecticut. My brother Charlie and I and our best friend Jason ran cross country. We didn't run very far, not like the high school runners of today, who are so far ahead of us and really tremendous athletes compared to where we were. But we did have fun with our running. It was very low key. We had a grass track. We had a really good coach, Coach Frank O'Rourke, who motivated us. So it's not only about the training, it's about the psychological part to running. And that's why I think years later, I believe the Greater Boston Track Club was so successful because we had another group of people who wanted to take part in the sport. We wanted to push it, we wanted to explore it, we want to see what we can do. And that's what our sport is all about, The health thing is there, which is huge, It's not understood very well, but I think Coach Billy Squires was instrumental in that, him being a world-class miler at Notre Dame University as a young man in his going on to coach here in Boston and coach the Greater Boston Track Club. So there was an enthusiasm and energy. I see that at Boston today and everything, but there are different parameters to the sport. And of course, we know that that to win the Boston Marathon, that was my third Boston. My first marathon ever was Boston. I dropped out. I think Boston's a very hard race to do your best in because of the tricky weather here in the New England spring. We all know this. If you come from Wyoming or Minneapolis, North Dakota, or New England, you're going to struggle if it's a hot day real quick in Boston and you're not used to the heat. And that's what happened to me. And I tried to move to California, actually, and my wife at the time and I tried to move to California because I felt, I was kind of thinking, I've got to train where it's warmer so I can be ready if it's warm. Because I knew I hadn't I tried my best, but it was 80 degrees that day in 1973. And within 3 days, it got so hot. And I didn't know how to pace myself. There wasn't water on the course. There weren't the pacers of today and all that.
No, so mile markers. Remember that? The checkpoints on the race course were the train stops. So that the Framingham train station at 6.75 miles was a checkpoint. And Wellesley's was 13.35 miles. And then they're one going to the hills. Got down in Newton at 17.75 miles. So who could do the math? You couldn't do the math. So the splits meant nothing. Natick was 10.4 miles out.
I think though, in those days, you weren't concerned with time. Time has become a recent focus, I think, because of the shoe companies in the last 10 years or so of the sport, you know. Then also the physiological aspect, you know, kind of how fast can a human run a marathon? Kind of like in the days of the 50s when people thought a human being couldn't run sub 4. Now it's kind of a human being run a sub 2 hour marathon, you know, that sort of thing. So there's some drama there. There's a lot of money there, that sort of thing. But when I was racing the marathon, it was more like, how can you do just against your competition? To me, that's still one of the highest parameters. Time is important, but I think winning is ultimately important. That's where the Olympic Games connection to Boston comes in, because Boston came out of the Olympic Games. You know, that Altius, Citius, Fortius, and everything. But I think for 100 years, the Boston Marathon didn't change. And it was really the athletes who changed the Boston Marathon. You know, people like Tom Fleming from New Jersey, who fought hard, professionalized the sport, Benji Durden, Mike Roach, Olympian, steeplechaser, Don Cardong, Olympic marathoner. You know, when we formed the Association of Road Racing Athletes and forced the hand of USA Track and Field at the time and forced the sport to go professional. Boston didn't want to go to professional. They were kicking and fighting to keep it amateur. But I always felt we could open the sport. We can bring money in and promote the sport the right way. We'll get more people to learn about the sport. This is what I'm always talking about. But it's a tough road.
Those were difficult. Those were difficult times, Bill, in the sense that the BAA was very recalcitrant. They did not want to change. They had an amateur past, and they believed that their mandate was not to pay money. And I said, no, your mandate is to get the best athletes in the world on that course on that day.
But
if
Toni,
it doesn't take money to do that, fine. If it does take money, fine. Money has no value outside of a consensus reality. What difference does it make if you have to pay to do it? But they didn't want to do it. And if you'll recall, the 1983 Boston Marathon had 91 guys run under 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Yeah.
2 years later, there were 2 guys running under 2 hours and 20 minutes with Jeff Smith.
Yeah.
Won, and Jerry Finesse, I think, was second place.
Yeah, Jeff
so
Smith
things were breaking down very quickly during that time period.
Yeah, so I think it was hard to make those changes. I got criticized. A bunch of us got criticized. Tom did. You know, when we ran that first professional race, the Cascade Runoff, supported by Nike in 1981. You know, Patty Dillon ran in that race. Lorraine Moeller from New Zealand.
Ann O'Dane won it. Greg Meyer won.
Ann O'Dane, Olympian from New Zealand. And Herb Lindsay from Michigan, great athlete. So all the athletes put themselves in line. We took a beating for a while from the press, the media, and from some of America's biggest races. Wouldn't allow us to enter. I got booted from some races, criticized in the media. But I think the good thing was that this wasn't the BAA's fault. This was the BAA listening to the International Olympic Committee. And, you know, for a long time, that's the reason why women weren't allowed into the New York City Marathon or any marathons, including or Boston. So that was the International Olympic Committee's fault. It wasn't Jack Semple's fault. It was enforcing the International Olympic Committee rules, which were very backwards. But all us athletes wanted to change the sport for the better. And I think it has changed for the better. There's still issues in the sport, as you know, Toni, too. And most people who are in the sport aren't in to really be involved thinking of the professional side of the sport. But I think I do love seeing, you know, when I see these runners out there. I was running yesterday, I saw this guy up ahead of me. He had his earphones in and everything. And he was real steady. It took me a while to catch him. I finally caught him, and I could tell, and he's probably doing his virtual Boston training. He's a new runner. And, you know, it's by hook or by crook. How do we get there? You need your teammates. That's one key, you know. So I ran for the BAA my first year as a marathoner. The only reason I moved to Greater Boston was because my teammates who I ran with at Boston College, that's where the Greater Boston Track Club would convene and meet, and we get together there and run on the track there and then head out to Jamaica Pond or something. You need your teammates. This isn't a sport where you stand alone, even though it's portrayed that way a lot. And in the end, when we're racing, it can be very tricky that way, you know, and, you know, you're with a friend but you're competing with them, you know, but still you shake hands at the end. This is truly a gentleman's sport. It's like golf. It really is.
You know, all the Kenyans, I've been to Kenya many times, and you go to these, you know, every morning workouts, and there might be 100 guys, including all 3 Olympians, 4 204 guys, 6 206 guys, also guys with no shoes, cut off jeans, and a ragged shirt who are just wannabes. But it's that environment that is created by that. Now, there's only 4 or 5 guys who can finish the workout together, but it's that big wheel. It's that big environment where everyone feels like they're a part of it. And I definitely had that. We had that feeling in Boston back in the 1970s with the Greater Boston Track Club on Tuesday nights at Boston College and the track workouts, where there might be 30 guys on the track doing different versions of the same workout.
And Bob Larson did the same thing out in California, you know, with the Yamul Toads, you know, Kirk Beffer, Ed Mendoza, all those top athletes out there.
Steve Ortiz, right.
Cross-country champions, road racers, and Neb, who he coached later. And so there, we always have had these great coaches, you know. Not all of them have the chance to rise, to find a way. We're seeing that now, I think, with some shoe company support. And I think the tough thing is it's tough to make a living, almost as tough today in the US or anywhere else, because, you know, almost nobody can win a major marathon unless you're born at altitude, Tony. A lot of the Americans who have made our Olympic team in the last 20 or 30 years have been born at altitude. Jeff Galloway wasn't, Frank Shorter wasn't, Joan Benoit wasn't, and I wasn't. But I think, you know, a lot of our runners, like Shalane Flanagan was born in Boulder, and Ryan Hall grew up at altitude, I think, and Ned grew up at altitude. And I think, I'm not sure if Jake Riley was born at altitude and everything or not.
No.
But Abdi was, I think, at 4,000 feet. You know, so I think this is the sport has become a sport in terms of winning events. You've either got to be born at altitude or training at altitude. You know, so everything has changed. You can't be at sea level anymore. It's a big change.
Bill, look, I'm gonna go into your record a little bit. I've got this sort of pulled up on my computer screen, and you know, you were, as I was looking through this in the early 70s. I mean, it's interesting. The first road racer result I see is from the Manchester Thanksgiving Day race in 1965. You finished 18th in that race. In 1965 in November. Boy, you were just like 17 years old or so.
Yeah, that was my first road race. And that was because I'm from Hartford, so Manchester's just outside of Hartford. One of the oldest Turkey Day races in America, great race. Henry Burfoot, my Wesleyan University teammate, along with Jeff Galloway, who also went to Wesleyan. We had a great coach there named Elmer Swanson, who guided us to avoid injuries. We ran on dirt and grass a lot, you know, following in the footsteps of young Johnny Kelly from Groton, Connecticut. So I came from that background where there was a lot of interest. Now, if you come from Boulder or something like that, there's interest there, or in California, you know, great training, weather, you know. So I think there's these pockets of now, or Flagstaff, Arizona. You know, when I went to Arizona, I went to Phoenix. I didn't think to go to Flagstaff. The only reason I went up that way was to see the Grand Canyon.
You don't realize that was the place would have been better to train. Although with the mornings to train in Phoenix were spectacular. The crystal mornings in the wintertime in Phoenix. The weather, so you could run forever. That was a beautiful weather. But I was back in the 60s, early 70s, you know, you said you dropped out of the 73 Boston Marathon, but you came in off a runner-up at the New England 30K Championships in New Bedford, so you must have been in pretty good shape.
Yeah, what happened was I got fired from a job at a hospital in Boston. I was trying to start a union there. They didn't like that. Like I said, I was a little bit of a troublemaker, but you know, you got to speak up sometimes, and that's the way I've been. So I got fired from my job, and I agree with you, Tony, that the Boston Marathon, I think, has a special place in American runners' hearts and minds, you know, because the history of the event, and you know, it's just so powerful and meaningful, you know. So when I first moved here, I had run in Boston area in New England cross-country championships, but I didn't really understand the Boston Marathon. Even though Andy Burfoot, my college roommate, won it, my teammate there, I didn't understand the marathon, except it's 26 miles. You know, I'm not going to run that. I'm running 5 miles cross country. That's hard enough. You know, that's enough. But when I saw it, you know, Jason and I, my old high school teammate from Newton High School in Connecticut, we had our motorcycles. We took our motorcycles over the finish line, you know. We all thought we were from Easy Rider and the Easy 70s, you know. Run a little bit, smoke a little bit, have some gin and tonics, you know.
Yeah.
This is the way
I
it
know those
was.
days.
But it was fun. But when I saw the Boston Marathon, it was exhilarating. And after a while, when my motorcycle was stalling, I had nothing left. You know, I got fired from my job, no money, no nothing. I joined the Boston YMCA, and that's where I got my start back to running. You know, and then start running and going outside. You know, to run outside. You know, run around Fenway and go out to the Charles River, run the Jamaica Way. You know, Jamaica Pond. So Boston does have this lure, and I hope the runners who are, you know, tuning in will try Boston, aim for Boston, because it's one of the peaks. It's one of the great peaks.
It's the People's Olympics, because it's the only one that has that qualifying standard. If you reach that, that's the same as an athlete of your stature making the Olympic Games, because it's you have to get lucky to hit the lottery right to get into the New York City Marathon or London or Berlin, the other majors. But you can get in without having any particular speed. But in Boston, you're challenged. And I've always said that I think the sport of running really should welcome full participation, but always identify and reward excellence. There's nothing wrong with identifying, rewarding excellence. At its heart, it is a foot race. It is point A to point B, see you there. First person in wins. I don't care how you look. I don't care where you're from. I don't care what God you pray to. If you're the first person in, we salute you. And
you're probably going to be praying to some God when you're running the Boston Marathon.
You sure? I've never felt closer to God.
One of those hot days, or like when Desi won in the brutal cold storm. You know,
you will definitely feel the presence of God, both positively and praying, thanking God for the spirit that can come over you while you're running if you're in flow state, or praying to God to redeem you from this horror that you're living through. So you have many conversations with God on the Boston Marathon route.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's like, remember Don Cardong's book, 10 telephone booths to Boston? And he wrote about, he ran the Boston course and would stop in telephone booth.
He couldn't get on the press truck, and he didn't know how to cover the marathon. So he was brilliant. So Don Cardong, of course, is just not only the founder of the Bloomsday 12K in his hometown of Spokane, and the fourth place finisher in the Olympics in the marathon, but a wonderful writer with a wonderful, very, very dry sense of humor. And of course, what he did was he went the 2 days before, and basically went along the Boston Marathon route and took down the phone numbers of all the pay phones along on the route. And during the course of the day, he knows what 5-minute pace is. He would call that number randomly, and whoever answered the phone, he would interview, and he covered the Boston Marathon that way the entire race, and wrote a book about it. 19 phone booths to Boston.
Tony,
Don Cardong, what a brilliant guy.
He deserved an Emmy or some kind of an award for that journalism.
Now that's that top-notch creativity. Top-notch creativity right there.
I mean, it's just mind-boggling, and it would only be in a sport like this that it could happen. But I think, you know, how the sport has changed so much, of course, you know, with women coming in, with Roberta Gibb being the first winner of the Boston Marathon for 3 years in a row. And then, of course, Sarah Mae Berman taking it at 3 years. And then Nina Kusek becoming the first official winner in 1972. And Kathy Switzer's collision there with Jack Semple, the bump that played a role in igniting women's running around the world. And
imagine if that hadn't happened. Imagine, because all it was just like it was early in the race, 3 or 4 miles into it. And she just happened to be running, and the press truck was coming by, making its way to the front. And of course, back then the crowds weren't so large that you couldn't have a press bus come through. And then somebody pointed out to Will Cloney, the race director, and Jock Semple, "Hey, Jock, there's a woman in your race." And Will Cloney was actually the first guy off the bus, but Will was a little bit older, not as fast, and he couldn't get after her. But Jock caught up to them. And of course, she was running with her boyfriend and coach and teammates from University of Syracuse. And they took poorly to Jock trying to rip the number from her chest. And her boyfriend, who I think was a hammer thrower on the Syracuse team, body blocked him into the bushes.
It
And
was
the
terrible.
photographers got that picture and it went viral.
You know, it was a terrible thing that our sport had to be under this kind of duress, pressure from the International Olympic Committee. But the International Olympic Committee was very ass backwards. And all we guy runners knew it. And the small number of women who were trying to break in there knew it. But it took a long time. It took till 1984 before the women had an Olympic marathon. And Kathy played a role in that and building up
A
the
huge role
Avon
with the Avon
series.
Marathon. She was an enormous contributor to women. And of course, the 73 women's champion, Jackie Hansen, played a big role in that. But you're well ahead of them. Of course, you've trained with women. I used to be a very good women's runner. Sadly, I was an adult male, but I would race against the top women. And it doesn't make, what difference does it? Racers are racers. They're not tall, they're not short, they're not blonde, they're not dark haired. Racers just become racing units. I mean, it's like you're nothing more than a unit going forward when you're racing all in. You're no longer a brother, a husband, a father, a mate. You're just a racer. And so it eliminates all the distinctions we've got, and that's the beauty of it.
The real truth was we runners, guys and women, had no power then. And that's what the Association of Road Racing Athletes event in 1981 was all about. Trying to get, the reason that came about, Tony, as you know, but most viewers don't know, is that there was an Olympic boycott in 1980. And the U.S. Olympic Committee was put under pressure by the U.S. government, you know, via funding and other means. We're not going to support your Olympic training centers and that stuff. So the U.S. Olympic Committee had to buckle, and we couldn't participate in the Moscow Olympic Games. And the U.S. leaned on some other countries like Kenya not to take part. And this is just very clear history nowadays. And so as a result of that incident, when we really took a beating, you know, and particularly we said, hey, we have nothing left. Let's try to, why shouldn't we be paid for what we do? We're pretty good athletes, aren't we? I think we're as good as baseball players. I think we're as good as football players. Yeah, we don't need to make $1 million or $5 million a year, but let's make a living, you know? So we fought for that. So there was that part of the sport that needed to change, and the women's participation side needed to change. Both of those have happened. Now our sport is in the brave new world. Where are we going to go from here? I'm waiting for the first marathon that will give away $1 million first prize. Which one has the guts? We know the winner deserves it. We know the money's there. And we know the sport is the greatest sport in the world and probably the most competitive sport in the world.
The most democratic, certainly the most democratic, because everyone can do it. Like we all begin as 100-meter sprinters, right? Everyone's a sprinter as a kid, and then you find your distance, and the people with the endurance go to the marathon. But it's like, you know darn well, if you're the best marathon, I mean, Eliud Kipchoge, I don't think there's somebody hiding somewhere where we haven't identified who's a better marathon runner than Eliud Kipchoge. I mean, if you're the best, the best sprinter in the world is the best sprinter in the world. It's like somebody's not, you know, track and field represents the world.
Yeah.
And so if you're the best in your event,
very few sports can say they've been competing on the 5 continents. Now, I've won a marathon on 5 continents. I have 2 other Americans, Ron Tabb and Frank Shorter. Very tricky to go out there and travel all over the world, and you and maybe 1 or 2 other American teammates duking it out against the top runners in Japan or Australia or in Europe at Amsterdam, wherever it is, you know. So I think I would love to see more and more. I think we have so much talent in America. Everything is, are you lucky enough to have a coach, Billy Squires, or a coach, Bob Larson? Some of the new coaches, though, today, I always take my hat off to the coaches, high school and collegiate and post-collegiate, because they're working so hard. And I'm hoping the shoe companies are compensating them well. But I'd like to see the rest of corporate America. Why doesn't corporate America get into supporting our Olympians a little better? Well, that would be great to see.
Well, it's also it's like prevention at its most base level.
Yes.
I mean, see, the thing is, money validates in our society. And so if they pay you a lot of money to do it, it validates your activity. If they don't pay you a lot of money, it negates your activity. But for the most part,
it doesn't mean that much.
If you run kids, you've had kids, Bill. If you run, and I was a teacher, we were both teachers before we got into these later professions. If you run kids before school, you don't have to give them as many drugs.
Yeah.
You burn off their fill.
I used to go to the Azalea Trail Run down in Mobile, Alabama. I ran there many years, and I would go into the schools in January, and the principals loved an Olympic athlete coming in, and I'd meet the kids. The kids loved it. We'd go out, we'd run in the gym, or else we'd go outside and run around the school. I've done this at other sites around the country. I was out in Indiana recently and did this at schools out there. And I had this idea, why not, how come, why isn't the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports made real? And let's, bring in some of the athletes from all the sports, but don't entirely crush these truly cardio important sports, the Olympic sports, such as running, walking, rowing, swimming. Michael Phelps, where is he? He should be doing commercials all the time and working on this kind of a program.
Even healthier adults, even at our age, are better suited and better equipped to handle something like the coronavirus because of the lifestyle that we've created throughout our entire adult life. Yeah. But you have to establish that at a very young age. So you don't have to think about it. You don't think about, today I have to go out and do my run. It's just it's on automatic pilot that you do an exercise, that you take care of your physical fitness. But that, like learning in general, is established early on. Bill, let's get off the society for a second. Let's get back into the particulars of the Boston Marathon. Your big breakthrough year was 1975. As I said, my first look at the Boston Marathon, you run 2:09:55. Your previous best was a 2:19, a 10-minute personal best, just extraordinary. But you also had come out of the bronze medal at the World Cross Country Championships in Rabat, Morocco, just a month earlier. And for the people in the know, that really was the identifying moment. You were, I think, only fourth at the trials race in Gainesville, Florida, four of those World Championships. Yeah. And then you go to Rabat, and then you take the bronze medal, and that was the first American medal at the World Cross Country Championships, which is, of course, John Walker, the first man under 3:50 in a mile, was right behind you in fourth place. So it was the classic World Cross Country, the original 12K version, milers to marathoners, everyone together over the grass, over the difficult terrain, the most difficult race in the world generally. What did that do for you in terms of confidence as you headed to Boston?
When I took the bronze medal there, I was shocked, but it was actually a three-man race pretty soon between Ian Stewart from Scotland and Mariano Haro from Spain. Spanish have always been really good cross-country runners, and so have the British, So I think I just hit the jackpot. It was one of those days. It was my best day of running. Everyone has their best day. That sort of thing. It was a perfect weather day. When I ran the trials, I was coming off the flu, and I tied with Gary Tuttle. What was ironic, though, Tony, was the day of that race, I had forgotten my spikes. But Gary Tuttle had a pair of Asics spikes. I was running for Asics at the time. He loaned me his spikes. I was sky high. I went out and ran 7 more miles after that, but I had the feeling that I could go with anyone in the world. I lost by 7 seconds. I got out kicked in the end, but we actually beat John Walker by 17 seconds. He was in fourth. So it was a real dog-eat-dog kind of a duel, but I loved it. It was over barriers and everything. I love cross country. 500,000 young American high school kids and collegians run cross country. You'd never know it from the sports coverage that I see. You never read about cross country in America. And that's
Foot Locker's done a great job, and Nike Cross National's done a great job. So there's a number of programs out there.
Yes, that's very important.
Held the torch high. But you came out of that bronze medal. Mm-hmm. What did you do with your training then before in those weeks before you had 1 month before Boston? You had somehow made a change, because I think in 1974 at the New York City Marathon, you had led for a while, but then finished 5th in 2:36. I mean, you died the bad death.
Tony, New York 74 was September. It was 95 degrees. I was probably half a mile or 3/4 of a mile ahead of everyone else in that race before I buckled from the heat. So that was just me learning to run the marathon. And of course, the New York City Marathon changed their tune and moved into late October. It was too hot to run the marathon.
But you also then but then you went and won Philadelphia in just under 2:22 in the 1st of December. But
Yeah.
then something changed. Something changed between that time and then April. I mean,
Oh yeah, it was very clear. What it
you
was,
really,
Tony,
you
was
went on. You started training. Did your training change? Did you up your training significantly after that?
I was training I built my training up pretty gradually from when I was starting to make my comeback in 72, 73. I was starting to get, to experiment with the marathon, and I did win that Philadelphia marathon, 2:21:57. It was a very cold day, like 27 degrees and windy. It was a tough day. I just ran, to me, I ran to win if I can. I do my best, like cross country. We weren't as time conscious, but so it was a little bit of a different thing. But I had done a 200-mile training week in 75. I also got a pair of Nike shoes from Steve Prefontaine through Jeff Galloway, who knew Pre at the World Cross Country. Jeff ran in the World Cross Country 75. I said, I'm running Boston next month. And of course, all we runners were in poverty world, and so I asked him and Frank, can you give me a pair of shoes, and I said, sure. So in the mail, I got a letter from Pre and the shoes, and they worked like a dream, It was just a perfect day. It was a tailwind day. About once every 10 years, you will get a tailwind at Boston. Boston is rarely like what it was when Desi ran into the terrible headwind, brutal cold. And that was an extremity, or like when Jack Foltz took the gold.
76, the run was 100 degrees.
Yeah, 100 degrees.
So
but it shows you that the parameters can be there.
Who was the big competitor in 1975?
75, Steve Hogue, who ran 2:11 that day, his PR, of course, my PR too. But Tom Fleming, I think, took third, I believe, And Frank Shorter had tried to enter the Boston Marathon, but couldn't get an air ticket to get to Boston. I think at some point he was running the Japanese version of Boston, Fukuoka International Marathon, which is one of the world's greatest marathons.
Right. But
Absolutely, that.
Wasn't Jerome Drayton also in there, the great Canadian champion?
Yeah, Jerome Drayton, who had the Canadian record for 40 years, which he set at Fukuoka, by the way, in 1975, and finally broken by, I'm trying to think of the young gentleman from Canada, great 10K guy, ran his marathon and ran a 2:09. But I think we had a perfect day. When you get the day, that thing sees the day. It's so true in this sport. So you're only going to get a few chances.
Where did you take the lead? Where did you take the lead, and were you nervous about that?
I was just kind of winging it, but I knew I was in shape from the World Cross, where I picked the bronze. By the way, I just wanted to clarify, Tony, four American men have medaled in World Cross Country, senior men's division. Myself and Craig Version took 2 golds, only American man to take a gold, and Alberto Salazar took a silver. And the young fella, Tracy Smith, took a bronze like I did. He took it in 73. World Cross Country began in 1903. It's about as old as the modern Olympic Games. And cross country may become an Olympic sport in Paris in 2024. That's where it was last an Olympic medal sport.
Well, wasn't Nurmi the gold medalist?
So that bronze medal is like an Olympic medal to me. And I think Olympic athletes understand that. No one else gets it about cross country.
So 75, you really broke through. Frank Shorter had the American record from Fukuoka at 2:10:30. And
yes.
You took 35 seconds off of that. Again, I think you sort of surprised yourself with the time. You stopped 5 times along the course to drink water, then once to tie your shoes, kneeling on your gloves, right? You took off your painter's gloves and you kneeled on them so you didn't scrape your knee, and then tied your shoes. I wonder what you could have run if you didn't stop 5 times.
I've always been someone who, I don't know, it's like a psychological thing. I was checking where the competition was as best I could see it. There was no crowd control in those days. It was very crowded with people cheering coming into the road and everything. Police on horseback, a big bus in front of us. It wasn't like today where it's very, very, the race has become manicured by Hancock. It's more safely and securely run. But I was just having fun. I was just cranking out. I knew I was in the lead. Jack Semple leaned out the door. I was running with my gloves in my hands because that's what I did in training. I put my gloves on, take them off in the winter, And he said, "You're on wreck the course," or something like that. "You want me to take your gloves?" I said, "No, no." So I was just winging it. And that's the way today everything is different because of the money. So
The splits, everything's
everyone's
down,
paced.
time trials.
Everyone's paced. We weren't paced. It was dog eat dog. Can you do this? And that's the way most runners are doing it. But
Of
at
course,
the front end, it's pacing when they're going for times, because this is the machinery of these high-powered marathons today. There's no pacing at Boston. One of the things I really, really love is that the Boston Marathon has kept it just competition.
a pure race, a pure race.
May the best man and women win.
Of course, in 1976, the top athletes did not run Boston because everyone was in Eugene running the trials, where you and Frank had that great duel and made the Olympic team. You come back in 1977 with you're an Olympian now, you're the record holder, so there's a much more of a spotlight on you. And it turned out to be one of those warm days, and you didn't make it all the way to the finish and ended up at the Elliott Lounge drinking a blue whale, as I recall.
Yeah, because I actually dropped out at the top of Heartbreak. That's my favorite place to drop out in the Boston Marathon. To any of the listeners, I just want to say it's about the 21-mile mark, 21 and a half miles.
Just before 21.
You got the Boston Marathon pretty well beat. You took a little bit of it. You got the measure of the Boston Marathon. After that, it's all downhill. So why keep going? But seriously, I was really beat up by warm weather 3 times at Boston. Dropped out, but it's very hard to drop out in Boston because the people of Boston love the Boston Marathon, and they will support you so much. And it's both a good thing and a bad thing. But I was really, really whipped. If there had been any nurses stations there, as there are in the modern era today, they would have had me on the ground taking my temperature. But I walked through the crowd and I kind of went into the back, and some coach recognized me and gave me a ride down to the Elliott, where a famous bartender named Tommy Leonard, the founder of the Falmouth Road Race, was kind of the spirit of the place, and the leader, kind of
the guru.
Yeah, he was our guru and everything, and a member of the Greater Boston Track Club as well. So I was pretty beat up. No one likes to take a beating, but we all do in the marathon. This is part of life. If you're in the marathon, you really get into it. You run enough marathons, you're going to get beat up. But Iliad hasn't had that happen yet. Maybe he will retire before it does. It's going to really.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Bill, I have it right here in my hand here. This is you're cordially invited. This is the invitation to the opening of the Bill Rodgers Running Center. Charlie sent it, or maybe I had it in my I had it in my books. I put it in a little frame.
Yeah.
This is the official, and it's starting to fall apart a little bit. Monday,
one of those, yes.
Monday, November 21st, 1977. Cordially invited to the Bill Rodgers Running Center, opening 372A Chestnut Hill Avenue. And of course, the times we had there, just a wonderful little walking down those stairs. Former flower shop, former dry cleaner, and it just nothing little bit of a place. But my gosh, the memories and the dreams that came true out of that little store.
Yeah, and all the runners from Jeff Galloway to Don Cardone to Frank Shorter, most of us, Jerry Lindgren, we all had stores because that way we could compete in the summer. Johnny Kelly had a store. Johnny Kelly from Groton, Connecticut, the 1957 Boston Marathon champion.
Marty's Athletic Attic.
It was so hard to make a living and compete as well. And that's why, after the boycott, we said, we also knew that it was tough to compete against maybe some of the other countries in the world that were state supported. We weren't state supported. No one supported us. We're all winging it. We're out there on our own. I was always amazed by people who didn't think the marathon was tough. In fact, people used to yell things at me and Tom Fleming and Bobby Hodge, those of us in Greater Boston, and say, "Why don't you get a job? You're never going to make any money running." And he was right for a long time, But now you can make a living running today, and some of the runners have done very, very well. But it's a hard way to make a living. Hard way.
No, but I was watching an old film, an interview with Johnny Kelly the Younger, and somebody was asking him, why he ran, and it was hard to put into words. Of course, he was a philosopher of sorts and a master of words.
Yeah.
And and I always used to ask the question of people, for people who don't run, what is it about running that they don't understand? Because when you look at people running, it doesn't look like they're having fun. And yet there's something about the activity that once it gets a hold of you, once it does grab your attention and your spirit, it lends itself, I said, to daily dosing.
Yeah.
It becomes its own drug. It really does. Your body asks you for it.
I mean, any physiologist worth his salt or cardiologist worth their salt will recommend that you be active. We know this today. Unfortunately, our healthcare system isn't geared to lean that way. You know, there's a lot of people that don't want that for our population, which is really sad, you know. But yeah, I agree with you. It's a fun sport. It's just you're out there with your friends, your teammates become your lifelong friends, and sometimes rivals, real rivals, but still that all ends in the end. You shake hands with your buddies, you know. So it's got this goodwill, and I think that is, you really feel that at all the major marathons, but the history of Boston going back to 1897, it's just different. No other marathon can match that. And that's what Boston's, that's why, you know, I love going to the finish line. I'm a retired marathoner now. I did 60 marathons. By the time I turned 40, I had done 50. 28 were sub 2:15. So I was pretty tired. You know, Frank Shorter and I both were ranked #1 in the world 3 times. That was tough. That was tough to do that, you know.
You got screwed in 78. Billy, you got screwed in 78 because they gave it to Moiseev after he got 5th, and you got 6th at Fukuoka. But you had won Boston, and you won New York City, and they gave you #2, and everyone thought you deserved #1 because Moisev was the European champion that year from Russia.
European champion.
And then
he beat me in Fukuoka.
He went by you on the track when neither one of you were really in the race anymore anyway, and Seiko won it again.
But I think what people find in the sport, we all find the same thing. Whether you're an Olympic gold medalist like Eliud Kipchoge or Joan Bonnet Samuelson, or who you are, or Rosa Moda, or Greta Weiss, or Ingrid Christensen, Dina Castor, Shalane Flanagan, no matter who you are, we all feel the same thing, or you're a raw beginner. But it is tough for the beginners. And that's why I said, if you can find a friend or join a team, there are so many running teams now, and the RRCA of America has 700 or 800 clubs around the country. Or join a track team. You know, go to your local track. Just don't push it hard. Don't sprint it. Just run easy and build your cardio. It takes a few months. It doesn't happen overnight.
Did you ever learn to play music of any sort?
No, but I love music.
No, but the point is, marathon running in many ways is like learning to play piano or guitar, where for the first several months, you're no good at all. In fact, you don't like doing it, and you got to be pushed to do it. But then you all of a sudden one day make something resembling music. Well, you're still not great, but at least you've touched a chord. And from that point forward, you sort of get into it and it captures you. That's the same thing as distance running. It doesn't, it's no fun for a long time. Then all of a sudden you've got it. And once that happens, you're in its hold. And so it's because of that investment early on where it wasn't any fun, that the glory of it becomes so meaningful because of the investment. You just nobody can give it to you as a present.
You know, I think because we're an all-weather sport, it's great. You can do the Jeff Galloway system, the run walk. I do a version of that myself today. I call it tourism running, where I run a little. I always run with my bottle of half Gatorade, half water. Then I stop and I take a sip and I look around. Let's see, any deer out here, birds I can look at. You know, you're kind of taking a break. You're a little beat up, you know, you got a lot of miles on you.
What do you think about when you're in competition? Let's go to the 1978 Boston Marathon. Again, you were wearing your singlet, your yellow singlet with your store's logo on the front. You're wearing your white gloves. It was another good day to run. Good competition, great competition. In fact, mostly in the form of Jeff Wells. It was interesting. I had our friend Bob Sebney, Coach Bob Sebney, who coached Joan Samuelson during her glory years. Of course, Seb was one of the guys that helped you guys start the store. He was working at the store back then. And I gave Seb one of my tape recorders, and because he was watching the race from Cleveland Circle at the running store in front of the store. And I said, Seb, I don't want you to talk into it. Just hold it, because I was looking for crowd sounds, right? To get the ambient crowd sounds. But I could still hear he was holding it. I still, to this day, could go back and listen to that tape, And when you went back by the store, the crowd was all cheering and they're going, go Billy and stuff like that. I counted it out. 60 seconds later, Jeff Wells came by.
Wow.
3 miles later, he was 2 seconds behind right on your backside.
Yeah. Yeah, that was intense.
Take us through those last 3 miles. And when you became aware that Jeff Wells was coming like a freight train.
You know, in 78, before Boston in March, I ran the World Cross Country again. I barely made the team. We had so many good runners, Danny Dillon, Greg Meyer, Arbogast, Guy Arbogast, Craig Virgin, Randy Thomas. So we had a really good team. We did take the silver medal for the US of A, though. I'm very proud to have been part of that team. Didn't run too fast, but one of the guys who beat me there was Jeff Wells. I knew Jeff was in the race, but he didn't know the course. I made my move coming down out of Wellesley, where I always like to run hard because I trained on the course a lot. It's a great place to make your move if you're really prepared for the downhill and the ensuing uphill after it over Route 95. So I was very lucky. It was a cool weather day, and Frank Shorter was there as well, as was his first Boston. But Frank was getting it. He was 6-7 years into the highest level of racing in the world. I mean, he was one of the best in the world. He was getting tired. So I made my move. He didn't know the course either really well. I knew this course because I lived here. I trained here. All the Boston guys did. We had an edge. There's no denying it, you know. And Jeff didn't have that edge, but Jeff was one fierce competitor, and he was actually fitter than me. And I saw him. Someone told me someone was moving up on me, Tony, with about a mile to go. I looked behind, and I could see a red uniform. I thought it was my teammate Randy Thomas. And I tried to go pick it up a little bit, but he was like a train, a speeding train. And I was kind of like a freight train by then. At the end of the race,
Yeah.
I was tired. You know, we ran 2:10:13 and 2:10:15. Not too bad for two guys from sea level, you know. But another 50 yards, he would have been flying by me. I mean, he was sprinting. He must have run his last mile. Eliud Kipchoge-ish, probably 4:35 or something like that. I think I probably ran 4:45 or something. I don't know what I ran. I have no idea. I just wanted to get across the line before him. But I knew the course, so I eked it out. I just eked it out, and that was it.
Was it pure fear?
Yeah, when I saw him, he kept. I mean, I could not believe how fast he was moving. You know, Jeff is a great talent. He ran for Athletics West, Nike sponsored team with Tony Sandoval, the great runner who won our Olympic trials.
They ran 2:10:19 at the Oregon Track Club Marathon, holding hands. They finished together, tied, the fastest tie in history.
Yeah. So I think running in those days, there was certain purity to it, just like it was 100 years ago. That's what Boston had and still has too, and marathoning still has. There's some weak parts to it still today, you know, which you know is true, Tony. But there's still the purity here, which is 99% of the sport, and we all had that, and we all have that today. And so the runners who are out there today who are running for the different groups, Impact Melanoma, who I work with, or Dana Farber, who Jack Foltz works with. I mean, you know, all these groups are so important because some people, they're never going to even be able to think about doing a marathon. You know, they're beat up from cancer or some serious disease. They got hit by something, knocked them back, and they can't get out the door. So I always think that runners and cyclists, people like this, these are the Olympic sports. To me, these are some of the highest level sports, you know, because you can do these things. You can do this fundraising. You know, I remember when Bobby Hall, the first wheelchair athlete, did Boston. He and I were good buddies, you know. And once I sat in his chair and tried to pitch myself, and it was a hospital-style wheelchair.
Right.
I knew what it was because I worked in a hospital for 1.5 years, you know, my selective service work and all that. So I knew what it was, but I said, these guys are tough, you know, and of course the women are out there now too, Tatiana McFadden and all the athletes.
Great
so
athletes.
Our sport has absolutely everything. And to me, it's like the peak of the sports world. And I think it keeps changing, but it's the tough thing about our sport, it's tough to get records. You know, and I think public likes to see records. But I think the more they have learned about our sport, the more they've loved it. So all the majors, Chicago, New York, Boston, Tokyo, Berlin, you know, I think there's probably going to be a new one, maybe in Beijing, China soon, I hope. You know, because the world needs to see this sport.
Well, I can imagine if it blossoms in China.
And then, because then you have your own health. Don't let anyone take your health from you. That's my
Well,
perspective.
right. Well, but you have to be proactive about your health as well. We're talking to the 4-time Boston Marathon champion himself, Bill Rodgers from Newington, Connecticut, graduate of Wesleyan University, got his master's degree at Boston College as well. People don't talk about it. You're a grad student as well, but a 4-time New York City Marathon champion, winner of so many marathons all over the world. Bill, you were talking about records. Of course, your second record at Boston came in 1979. Now you're going for your third win. And that year, the big gun coming in was all the way from Japan, your great rival, Toshihiko Seiko, who by that time was already a multiple-time Fukuoka Marathon champion. And in many people's eyes, the man. He was the guy on the come. He was still a young guy, but he had proven himself already. You were well aware of him, but you both got another beautiful day to run and took full advantage of it. Take us through the 1979 race.
Yeah, 79. Toshiko had beaten me in Fukuoka when I was defending champion. I won Fukuoka in 77. Frank Shorter won it 4 times. We're the only 2 Americans to ever win Fukuoka. And very, very tough race to win. You know, it's very flat and fast. And when I ran it, I was maybe in the best shape of my life, I think. But Tom Fleming, my American teammate, we took 1st and 4th. I think it's the best that American ever did with a 1-2 team effort at Fukuoka. But at Boston, you know, I knew Toshihiko, just like with Jeff Wells, Toshihiko did not know Boston. And most of the Japanese races, most of the races in the world are flat. That's the model today, like Chicago or Paris or London, because people want fast times. You know, Boston's the old style race, and New York is too, in a certain way. It kind of copied Boston a little bit. It was the terrain of New York. So I kind of knew that, but I was in good shape. I had set the world record on the track. And in
25 kilometers, 25 kilometers.
Yeah, 25 kilometers, which is 15.5 miles. I did that out in California with the help of Coach Billy Squires and a Canadian named Dave Prokop. They timed me out there. So broke the world record, 1 hour, 14 minutes. That's about 2:05 pace. Go another 10 miles at that, Tony.
But psychologically, Bill, I've always said, and you used to do your long runs back in the day around Jamaica Pond, which is 1.5 miles around. You used to do like 14 laps of that darn thing. If you could do 75 laps of the track at 440s, at 440, psychologically, that just makes you an absolute beast.
Yeah.
Because part of what goes first on you, the body follows the mind. I found in sport. And so if you crack mentally, your body says, fine, I'm with you all the way. So if you can steel yourself psychologically,
that set me up.
You can put those 75 laps at world record pace has got to give you a strong mentality.
Yeah, I only broke the world record by 3 seconds, but I did break it. And tough to get a world record, especially on the track, you know. And even though that's an obscure event. And what's really amazing is no American has tried to break it since. You know, and Galen Rupp and Meb and a bunch of other guys could nail it.
Seiko broke your record. Seiko got it himself later.
Yeah, he got it a few years later. The difference was, though, that I wasn't paced when I ran the American, I ran the world record, still the American record, in 79. I wasn't paced. Toshihiko was paced in 79 by the Japanese steeplechase record holder. And I know Moses Mosop, I think his name, when he ran out at the Prefontaine, and I think he might have, I don't know if he set the world record there. Or I'm not sure who has it. Or
Moses Mosop.
Yeah, 1 hour, 12 minutes.
This year at the Boston Marathon in 2011, that 2:03:06.
I think the runners were paced today. If I had someone to pull me through, maybe I could have taken it down some more. But I think that's
so. Anyway, you come into Boston with that. You come into Boston with a world record under your belt, just like you come in off the bronze medal at the World Cross Country a few years earlier. So your mentality is, I'm ready to roll. How did the race unfold?
You know, when I raced Toshihiko in 78, I was coming off the flu. I had won New York in 78. One of my weaknesses was I would run 3 or 4 marathons a year. You know, runners like Toshihiko and Roberto Salazar, the new breed of runners coming up in the 80s, they generally only did 2 a year. Shorter was like that too as well. I was very smart. I was a little bit of a wild marathoner. You know, you're going to have a marathon over here? Okay, yeah, let's do it. You know, and Ron Tab was like that, and Vince Jordan, heck, it's only a marathon.
So anyway, go back to 79. It's a great day. You're in great shape, but you got great competition. That's why that's the perfect setup for we, the people who love to watch these things. How did it unfold?
Well, it actually unfolded with my buddy, Tom Fleming from New Jersey, two-time winner at New York and third place at Boston. He loved the Boston Marathon, actually even more than the New York City Marathon. He's a New Jersey guy, you know, a great athlete, very good friend of mine. We were training partners and all that, but he took the lead. Tom was a terrific front runner and very strong guy, trained on a lot of hills. Yeah, big guy and everything. Really pushed, kind of like Lee Costello from Australia. Mm-hmm. And but I started to push and down through the hills, you know, and Gary Bjorklund was with me. And we came up to Seiko, and Seiko was following us. But we caught Tom around the first hill, and Gary said, go for 208, you know, run for 208 or something like that. And I had totally forgotten about Toshihiko. I was just running for whoever's in front of me. You know what I mean? That's the way I always ran, Tony. It didn't matter to me who was there or what, you know, because that's the way you got to race. But I think I sort of became aware of Toshihiko then, and he was just kind of tracking me because Toshihiko won a lot of his races with his kick finish.
Right.
He was very good
10,000 meter track runner.
Yeah, a really good 10K guy, and he was really good mentally. But as an athlete, his coach emphasized the psychological part of running, same as Eliud Kipchoge does. You know, you can see certain athletes are really geared that way, but I think my edge was I knew the courts, you know, and so I got away from him through the hills, you know. And then, of course, 2 years later, Toshihiko came back, and he broke my courts record by 1 second. You know, but it's kind of fun because, you know, we were about the same. You know, and we're like good buddies when we see each other. When he comes to Boston, or I was in Japan at one of the races at the Ome Marathon, you know, we always shake hands. We're buddies, you know. And I understand how the Japanese they're like the Kenyans, you know, the Ethiopians, you know, or the Americans with this British from way back, you know, the history of the marathon. This is what you feel at Boston. This is what the best runners in the world feel too. The runners that really get into it, whether it's Ron Hill or I don't know, Mary Kaitani. It doesn't matter what country you're from, but you know about the history. And if you feel that your country has done well, then you feel you should do well. And I think that's why runners come to Boston.
Where did you break away from Seiko in '79?
Mm-hmm. I broke away and going through Heartbreak Hill. You know, I was really pushing it, and
on purpose. I mean, was it a purposeful move, or did he just fade off the existing pace?
Yeah, he just faded off because he was not used to training for the hills. You know, later he moved to, you know, in the winters, a lot of the Japanese runners will go to Colorado and train at altitude, or Toshihiko went to New Zealand, trained in New Zealand, you know. But of course, I trained on the Boston courts all the time, like every other day, you know. So I knew the hills like the back of my hand. So that was a big edge for all of us in Boston. But it was also that I'm from this area. I'm a New Englander, and I'm an American, you know, and I felt a lot of pride in that. I still do. And it's just like, you know, the Kenyans take pride in their running, and the Japanese take pride in their running. But I think I felt that strongly. And so I did have the crowds on my side, Tony. But I always felt that, you know, I had this deep admiration for Toshihiko and the Japanese runners because I knew about, you know, about World War II and the struggles between our countries, and how Boston, you know, they invited this young Japanese guy to run the Boston Marathon just 10 years later after the war. And he won the Boston Marathon. And in Japan, the Japanese people saw the strength of their young athletes, and we can still do well. And what a link between our countries. You know, the history of this race is unbelievable, like you said at the onset of the show, Tony. So it's something unique, and I think everyone who runs Boston, you add to that history. You're part of Boston. No one can take it away from you. No one.
That was the first invitation to an international event to a Japanese athlete by any international event, and the Japanese never forgot that from the Boston Marathon. So it was a very special time. And of course, so many Japanese athletes over the years, they dominated back in the 60s, in the mid 60s, a great nation of runners. Of course, you got one more victory coming up, 1980, and that was a warm year. Now, of course, it was a squirrely year because it was the Olympic boycott year. Normally, if we hadn't boycotted, you probably wouldn't have run the Boston Marathon, and you would have only been a 3-time champion. But as it turns out, you didn't go to the Olympic trials in Buffalo because it really wasn't for the trip to Moscow, because they weren't going to Moscow, and you had a chance to come here and win your 4th title. Now, the big difficulty that year was another warm day. So maybe the field wasn't as deep as it would have been in a normal year, but then again, the other side of that coin was the weather was not to your favor either. And I know that you had your sights on another New Zealander who was Kevin Ryan, who was living in Boston at the time, working at New Balance, and he, of course, he had finished 6th in a previous year, and Kevin was a tough guy.
Yeah, he was very good.
A great lot. He and his wife were great members of the Boston running community back in those days, and he was a lot of fun. But he was a tough guy when he got him rolling. So what was that race like in 1980? Were you worried about him? Worried about the weather?
It wasn't. Yeah, I was worried about the weather some, but not too much. The whole thing was about the Olympics, Tony, because I had run in the Olympics '76, one of the great honors to make a country's Olympic team, and I had developed a foot injury before Montreal Olympic Games '76, so I was crushed. When I fell apart halfway through the race, my foot started hurt. I limped in, I made it in, but I still remember I was 40th place. 40th.
Brutal.
People were yelling at me to drop out. That was depressing, but I got back to the stadium in Montreal and I looked up and it said, "See you in Moscow, 1980. So I really wanted to go back. And every athlete who has a chance, and I came out of nowhere, suddenly had a chance to become an Olympian. Who knows who has a chance? People out there, young high school kids watching this, I hope they think that way and aim for that. It's great fun. It's an honor. But when the boycott was announced, I was crushed, because the United States is, along with Great Britain and Greece, the original founders of the modern Olympic marathon, along with the French founder, Coubertin. So I was just surprised, but I do know about the politics of the Olympics. It's a sitting duck, and everyone's going to take their pot shots.
Easy target to hit without a lot of political fallout, except for the athletes.
And so the athletes took a beating, and because we're not the highest profile athletes in America, it was kind of people didn't worry too much, Hey, we got one coming up in '84. Well, not for me. I tried for it in '84, but I was getting older, But anyway, who really cares in the end, sort of? It was just, it's not a crushing blow. It's not like but I knew I can't run, so I'm going to run Boston, I'll run Boston. And what happened was Kirk Beffer, who was kind of a rival and a very, very strong runner.
He gave you all the business you wanted in New York City the year before when he had a big lead and you had to run him down.
Yeah, he's a great talent and very determined guy, and coached by Bob Larson, Med's coach. New training, had great teammates, so he. But I was pretty fit. I had gone down to Miami to train in the winter. Tom Fleming was down there. Bobby Hodge was down there. We were trying to train. This is before the boycott was announced. It was literally announced about March. It's going to happen, and so the rug was pulled out from under us. And so it was like there's nothing to do. The problem was in those days there was only the Olympic Games where we could really. There was the Boston Marathon and New York was coming up and Chicago and so forth. But still, you know what I'm saying, Tony? A place where you could represent your country in the biggest stage. Fortunately, there's now a World Championships of track and field. I would have aimed for that in my prime if I had had that opportunity, But it wasn't around until 1983. So the Olympics meant more to us, sort of, in those days, or it had to feel like more. But I knew I could win. I sort of felt like I could win, because I had won before. I knew it was, and I got away from Perk at about halfway, and I just fought my way through. It was a hot day. It was like 80 degrees or something,
Bill, I don't know if you realized it, but when you took the lead at Wellesley, you passed a movie theater. And the big movie that was playing around in that time, that spring, was that movie about bicycle racing in Indiana called Breaking Away.
Breaking Away,
very funny movie. Very
that was
funny
a good movie, yeah.
Very well done. So here you were, breaking away to win the
Yeah.
Boston Marathon in front of the theater whose
Yeah.
marquee said breaking away.
I was very lucky to get a fourth win and to join Robert Chariot and
Gerard
uh,
Cote.
yeah, Mr. Cote from Canada. So we are ranked number 2 all time in the 125-year history of the Boston Marathon. Very proud of that. I fought hard to do that. You know, number 1 is the great American, Clarence DeMar. I don't think anyone's going to get that record, but who knows, you know. But I would have liked to have gone back to the Olympics and everything, but c'est la vie. You know, I just did my best, and President Carter felt he was doing the right thing for the country. I totally understand that. You know, he was the president, and you know, I don't know, I'm sort of old school in a way, so you always think that way. I still like President Carter despite that sort of a thing. And I read a book about the Olympic boycott. There's a great book out there. And you know, the politics. It was very tough stuff for him to do, I think, you know, and everybody.
Bill, if you had not become a distance runner,
Mhm.
you ever think about that? What you would have, I mean, what your interests in life would have been? Of course, you were a special ed teacher.
Yeah.
And in fact, as a matter of fact, as I recall, you used to do your training run after you already won Boston in 1975, and then at your lunch break at your school, you go down to the basement and change in the,
Yeah.
like the boiler room. And then
That's
the
what we all
principal
did.
didn't the principal say, "Do you really have to do that? Do you really have to do that?"
Yeah.
And you said, "I think I do. I quit." But
Yeah.
you would have been
No,
a
they
special
actually.
ed teacher. Nobody would have known who you were except those kids.
Yeah. You know, I really love being a teacher. My dad was a teacher, you know, for 35, 40 years. So that was that I think underlying.
My mom was a teacher for 40 years.
Yeah. So our parents are key for our support, you know, absolute key for me and my brother Charlie and our good friend Jason and my sisters and all. So I always had the support of my brother Charlie too. And you know, I think everyone has that. Like Mev has his brother Mahawi with him, you know, and so we all have someone who's not visible, who's standing behind you. No one succeeds alone. I don't care who you are. Elliot has someone with him. Maybe it's his wife, it's his great support, or his friend. His I don't know what is driving him, who is behind him. You know, Deke had his great coach and everything. Toshihiko had his great coach. You know, the Inga Bitsons from Norway have their father, their coach. So everyone has their leader. You know, Chalane's mom was a world record holder in the marathon. Her dad, Steve, I raced Steve. He was damn good.
Colorado Track Club.
Yeah. So you got parents like this. There's something in the water, something in your mind. It's amorphous. It's floating around. So we all got to expose our kids to a chance. Just give them a chance, because when you give the young people a chance, boy, they're really good. They're really
You
good.
know, for those watching, Billy and I used to do this all the time on the run with me holding my tape recorder. I still have all those tapes, and I listened to them for Runner Mod Jamaica Pond, you know, 2, 3, 4 laps, whatever it would be. And we'd just talk and do the same sort of thing. So we've been doing this and I remember one time we were running Mod Jamaica Pond, and I said, "Boy, Bill, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be something if you had a nickel every time you ran around this thing?" And you took about 2 more steps, and you said, "I do. I got more than a nickel for every time I ran around Jamaica Pond." So I said, "I always like a nickel for every time you and I had a chance to chat." But once again, as it always has been over all these years, it's been a joy. It's been a pleasure. We've shared a lot of time and miles together, and we've shared this great sport together. And I'm glad we had a chance to talk here at the virtual Boston Marathon, though, of course, I would much rather be back home with you and everybody else as we wait for the start in Hopkinton, heading toward Boylston Street and that great finish line. So I want to thank you for taking all this time to chat with us about the things that matter to you, the history of Boston. And we want to wish all our friends watching the best of luck in your virtual Boston Marathon. And keep the spirit alive. Stay safe.
Take your time.
Stay well. And we'll see you in Boston in 2021. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tony. See you on the roads, Tony. See you on the roads, Boston Marathoners.